Hi, Bruce.
I know.
What do we do with the substance from the Tobin letter and from the McLynch letter that we got today?
I think, we can, commission members will look at that public comment and the executive group will, and decide if there's any, if we want to incorporate any of the points into our final report. We're in public meeting right now, as a reminder.
Yeah.
So I think it remains to be seen whether we're persuaded that any public comment that we receive at this point will have a significant effect on this final draft that we've put together.
When do you start your treatments?
Again, we're in public meeting right now.
Oh, okay.
I
Forget
probably won't
that.
go into
No,
detail,
no,
but-
it's fine. Okay, good. Okay.
Okay. I'll know better soon. Thanks. We'll have another conversation about that.
Yeah.
Here we are. It's been at least, 3 or 4 hours since we've been together.
It's good though. I'm looking forward to it. I think this will be a good meeting. A lot of progress. It's always, I feel like you write the first draft of something. That's the hardest part is just getting all the words, all the thoughts down, getting it organized in something that sort of makes sense, and then you can just let a bunch of smart people tear it apart and and tell you all the places that needs to get fixed. And I think that's where we're at. So that, to me, this is the part I really like. The first drafts are always really tough, and then you get into the editing, and it comes together like magic sometimes. I feel like,
Oh, Carrie and I spent some time this morning doing some editing. So after we got out.
Looking for the magic. That'd be good. Yeah, and it's also it's such a big long report that we can look at it forever and find places that there's simply typos or word choices that we wish we had done something differently. But we have a week from today to do that, so I think fine. And I hear there's a holiday in between, but this year there'll be a pretty limited holiday, we know. So we'll be working right through. One thing in the report, and in the forward where Dave says that there have been 180 hours of meetings of the full commission and work groups. I don't think that does, Carrie, do you know if that includes all the stakeholder meetings and focus group meetings? Yeah, I didn't think so. Right.
No, that 180 hours is purely work group and full commission meetings.
That's public meetings, right?
Not including public comment periods.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in my head, I did a quick calculation a few minutes ago in that Carsey meeting of at least another 40 to 50 hours.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to make my number match in the engagement.
And then I was going to
The description at the beginning there, because my number wasn't the same as Dave's.
well, yours was 170 something, or
Yes.
and then I was going to do I was going to try to calculate the person hours involved. And
Yeah, my wife's right. My wife's right here. You want to talk to her about that?
Yeah.
Number of hours spent on Zoom.
Oh.
Yeah, what does Diane think of?
Well, it was interesting because I was talking to Rick and I mentioned Diane's concern about the amount of time, and he was saying, I'm getting the same thing from my wife too. So it's a lot of time. And the issue of right now, when you kind of cobble together all of the thoughts of the three work groups, it's difficult to bring all those component parts together into a single document. Hi, Val.
Good afternoon.
The nice thing is that it is, yeah, it's all together now, and so now
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
nice. It's all there.
Yep.
It's all there.
You need all the ingredients before you can, make the cake. So
Yeah. Good day, Corinne. How are you today?
Good, we're getting much needed rain. I don't have to
Oh,
shovel
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Good.
Somebody was telling me it was going to be a cold winter, but not a snowy winter today.
Oh. Well, we were lucky. We didn't have too many bouts of that below zero stretches last winter.
Yeah.
But plenty of snow.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
I just took Tylenol for this meeting. Nice work, Bruce, and your team. Wow, that was phenomenal report.
It was excellent. Very well done.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's a team effort.
Hi,
That's for
Jordan.
sure.
The only problem is, can you take my code off my name? Because now everybody's going to have my Zoom thing.
yes, let me rename you.
Easy to do, yeah.
I couldn't get in. He had to
Okay,
help
so
me.
Ardinger has a new Zoom face, Zoom portrait.
Yeah.
I
There we
was
go.
leaving that for Luno to see.
Don't I get a royalty for that?
You're good to go. Thank you.
Oh, this is great for Bill. I just see it now. We're
Barbara,
all
I had
gonna
to,
do this now.
it's not as good as the.
Good
as the
job,
dog.
Bill.
I know it.
Yeah. I'm glad we're coming into this in a good state of mind.
All right, so we're right at 2 o'clock now. We're missing a whole bunch of people. Missing the senators. All right, let's give folks a few more minutes to join us. There's Jay. All right. Jay, I'm working on all the stuff you asked me to do.
Yeah,
Making good progress.
I got to start. There's so many constant interruptions. Making our way. See, I had something from Mel.
Hey, John.
Hello.
Hello, Mary.
Hello, I'm mute. I always forget I'm on mute. Safer that way.
Hey, we got 4 more hours of this stuff. Can you believe it?
It was a 2-hour meeting.
Today's 2 hours,
Okay.
and then a week from today is 2 hours.
All
A
right.
few folks here might have a few more than 4 hours left.
Yeah, and then how
Yeah,
much
yeah,
time
yeah,
in
yeah,
between?
Yeah, and you know, as Bruce is going to say, this is really I mean, none of the stuff we're looking at is new. It's all stuff that we've hashed around, but recommendations, findings, stuff like that. Bruce is going to take us through those. And once we get the meeting started, I'll you know, we'll take some thoughts on how we can all help out. So, hello, David.
Hi, everybody. How are we doing today?
Good, good. It's always a good sign when you're able to join us.
I'm the barometer now, huh?
Yeah.
Gary. Thank you. Yeah, we got a no-hitter going since Saturday, so that's good.
Oh, that's great.
That is good, yeah.
Yeah, we're hopeful, very hopeful. We just want to get to Thanksgiving without any more issues.
What grade level was that student?
Elementary. And the issue now is with the rise in community transmission, we're starting to see more and more of our adults who are just doing regular things that they've always done, but now coming down with some symptoms, which then becomes problematic for spread in school. So it's going to slowly become a staff capacity issue before it becomes a school-based transmission issue. Too many adults are going to unfortunately be sick where they won't be able to come in, or our teachers who live in other districts will be moving to remote based on their transmissions and unable to come in and service our kids in schools. So this is going to be it's going to be a numbers game. We said back in June this was ultimately going to be a labor issue, and it's certainly playing that way. So.
Oh, wow.
But it's nice to see everybody here is healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it that way.
Knock on wood.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's keep it that way. So I know we're seeing some spread here in Hopkinton. I've seen even on Facebook some families indicating that it's that it's in their household. They're quarantining, so hopefully keeping it out of the community. But yeah, everybody stay healthy. So, well, I think we've got just about everybody here. I'm not seeing Rick, but I think we got everybody else. Does that look about right?
I don't see Mel.
No, I see Mel.
Hi, Mel. Sorry. First one to say hi. So yeah.
So all right. Well, why don't we get things started, and hopefully Rick will be able to join us when he can. So we'll call to order this. How do you pronounce it? Penultimate meeting of the Commission to Study School Funding. Today's November 23rd, 2020, just a little bit after 2 o'clock. And as we have for all our meetings since April, all remote meetings, all open meetings posted in legislative calendars and on the Commission website. We start with a roll call of our members and our Carsey team, consistent with the governor's emergency order. So I'll start it off. Dave Lunow here in Hopkinton with Ozzie the long-haired dachshund, and Mel.
Mel Myler, Kentucky, New Hampshire, by myself.
Great. And Dick Ames.
Yes, I'm here, and Jeffrey by myself in my home office.
Great. Thanks, Dick. I don't think Rick's joined us yet. Jay Kahn.
Jay Kahn in Keene at home by myself with my cowbell to ring for Mel Myler.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks, Jay.
And let's see, John Morgan.
John Morgan here in Exeter and currently alone in the room.
Great, thanks, John. And Bill Ardinger.
Bill Ardinger here in Concord, New Hampshire at my home, in my home office alone.
Great, thanks, Bill. And Jane Bergeron.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jane Bergeron. I am here at home in Litchfield, and Otis is not here today. He's outside swinging Christmas lights.
Oh, wow. Fun. Thanks, Jane. And Corinne Cascadden.
Corinne Cascadden here from Berlin, New Hampshire, my home office by myself.
Great. Thanks, Corinne. And David Ryan.
I'm here in the home office of SAU 16 in Exeter. And Jay, I have a fever, and the only prescription is more cowbell.
That's good. Knew that was coming. So, John Beardmore.
Good afternoon, John Beardmore in Hopkinton in my newly renovated but very echoey home office.
Thank you, John. And Iris Estabrook.
Hi from Portsmouth, family in the other room.
Great, thank you, Iris. And Barbara Tremblay.
Barbara Tremblay at home here in Keene. My husband's in the other room. Hello, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
Thank you, Barbara. And Chris Dwyer.
In my Portsmouth office alone.
Great, thanks, Chris. And Susan Heward.
I'm in my Concord office alone.
Great, thanks, Susan. And Val Zanchuk.
I'm in my office in Jaffrey, all alone.
Thanks. And Mary Heath.
Mary Heath here in Manchester. My husband's in the room and I too am cheering for Mel Myler. Yay, Mel.
Yay, Mel. And Rick Ladd.
Hi, this is Rick Ladd in Haverhill and alone. My wife's upstairs.
Great, thanks, Rick. And to introduce our Carsey team, we've got Carrie Portry.
Carrie Portry here in Dover in my apartment alone.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And Jordan Hensley.
Jordan Hensley, also in Dover. My fiance is in the other room.
Great, thanks, Jordan. And Bruce Mallory.
Yeah, Bruce Mallory is present. My home office in Kittery Point, Maine. Family's downstairs.
Great. All right.
And Dave, one thing on just for the record, I noticed on the agenda that was sent out, and I guess it's been posted, it reads 2 o'clock till 4:30. That's incorrect. It's 2 o'clock till 4 o'clock today.
Yeah, mine says 2 to 4.
Oh, okay, fine. This must be an earlier version I printed.
Yep. So 2 to 4. If we get out a little earlier, that'll be fine too. But we'll talk a little bit about that and how we can all contribute to the work to get us to next Monday, and which will be our last meeting, 2 to 4, and we'll have by then really a final based on what we talk about today, and the work that goes into producing it over the next handful of days. So let's see, Jordan, how are we looking as far as access is concerned?
I think we're all good. We've got 18 attendees from the public with us today and no reported issues.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks to everybody who's been able to join us, and a lot of people have been joining us, committed to this process the whole time. So thanks for that attention and that commitment to students across the state. Just really only one quick item, and we'll get down to business. But obviously, one of the things we're going to be doing today is after we talk about the Carsey contract extension, is Bruce is going to lead us through what are really the sort of the findings and recommendation points in the report. And I think most of the other language, people have either read or they've contributed to, the work group reports and stuff like that. The order of paragraphs might change, wording tweaks might change, spelling corrections are certainly going to be made. A lot of the nits over the next few days. So we're not. I don't think we really want to take up this time to go through the nitty stuff, but in general, we're hoping people find that the report reflects the work the commission did, what the commission heard, and fairly represents that fairly represents what the work and what the commission heard. Like a lot of things, you might agree with most of it, you might not agree with something, or you might not like it, but if that's what the commission heard, if that's what the evidence, how the evidence pointed, and it's relevant to the report, it's in the report. And if you don't like it or you disagree with it, we've got member statements where you can lay that out, or if you think something that should have been considered wasn't considered because we didn't invite somebody to come speak or present a report to us that you think was essential, bring that up. in the personal statement. But hopefully, we're going to be able to reach consensus, on this report by the work we're doing today, looking at findings, looking at recommendations, making sure that everybody's, generally, in agreement on those, and we can reach a consensus point. And the objective a week from today will be to, take our one vote on, on the report, and make it ready for all the people who will receive that report on Tuesday next week. So that's really all I had. And I think I think after today, if people are sort of still chewing on some parts or want to share some thoughts, whether it's detail corrections or whether it's, hey, here's another way of wording this that I think is more consistent with what the commission heard, or what the evidence suggests, then send an email to Bruce on that. You don't have to send it to me or Mel or Jay. Send it to Bruce. Most importantly, don't send it to everybody, because we're not going to do online deliberations. We can do remote meetings online when they're posted and they follow the emergency order. But if you've got thoughts, just direct it to Bruce. And I'm sorry to make Bruce the point person on it, but I think we need to have one single point of contact for that, so things don't get missed, and this can be an organized week of chaos. So anyway, I guess our first order of business is to give a quick look and approval to the minutes from our last commission meeting held on November 16th. So that's I know Jordan had sent that around right after the meeting. It's on the commission website, and if everybody's had a chance to give that a look-see, I'd take a motion to approve the commission minutes from November 16th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Myler, seconded by Tremblay. Is there further discussion, amplification, correction, deletion, addition, whatever anybody wants to do to this? So Jordan, great job as always on these minutes, very detailed. Seeing none, we'll do a quick roll call to document the vote. Luno, yes. Myler?
Yes.
Ames?
Yes.
Ladd? Rick?
Unmute.
You got it, Rick? Well, we'll come back to Rick. John?
Yes.
Morgan?
Yes.
Ardinger?
Yes.
Bergeron?
Yes.
Cascadden?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Beardmore?
Yep.
Estabrook?
Yes.
Tremblay?
Yes.
Dwyer?
Yes.
Heward?
Yes.
Zanchuk?
Yes.
Heath?
Yes.
Great. So the minutes carry. And next order of business is what did I just do here? Yeah, is the is discussion review of the contract extension with the Carsey School, and I believe the formal extension document created by the UNH sponsored services team was sent out to everybody. Dick, I think we might be getting a little feedback through your speaker.
Okay.
Is that sounding better?
Yeah, we're good now.
Yeah. So we'll get that set up for you, Dick, at some point. So anyway, Rick, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had to step out, and the contractor, we're putting a new deck in the back, and it's a huge deck. So I'm going to be in and out a little bit here. I apologize for missing. I must have gone by the minutes here. I apologize for that, but I've got to run out. I got 2 contractors out back.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Sure. Good luck with that, Rick. Rick, you want to mute? Rick?
Oh, let me put it on mute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rick. So Bruce did send along the formal documentation for the contract extension and the impact on the articles in the main contract, and it includes the extended payment schedule, and with the balance of I think the funds for this contract extension is basically the remainder of what was appropriated for this commission and what we have authority to together to go ahead and spend. And I think that comes to $44,543, and with essentially $25,000 to be paid on March 30th, and the balance of $19,543 to be paid on June 30th. And I think the other addition to this contract extension was to the statement of work. And by the way, USNH counsel Ron Rogers has reviewed it. House counsel Jim Cianci has reviewed it. The Speaker's office is good with this. But the statement of work, based on some I think discussion that the commission had, now includes maintaining a channel for collecting public comment following the release of the final report and extending through June 30th. So comments will be collected as they have always been collected. And should the commission have any meetings, they'd be collected at that, and absent that, they're always collected via the form on the website, the commission website, and through the commission email. So the team will continue to provide that. So I would, in order, I guess, to sort of open this for discussion, I'd take a motion to approve amendment number 1 to the between the Commission to Study School Funding and the University of New Hampshire, and it's contract number 20-0546.
So moved.
Moved by
I'll
Myler,
second. Mary Heath will second.
seconded by Heath. So is there any further discussion on this contract extension?
I would, Dave, just like to thank you for reaching out to legal counsel for the legislature, and based on getting that review done and have that attorney take, proper legal responsibility for the status of this. I want to thank you. I asked for that, and I appreciate you doing it. So
Great. Bill, thanks. It was it's absolutely the right thing to do. Of course, I wanted to run it by you guys first, prior to taking any action, prior to having a third party look at it. But nope, that's absolutely the right way to do it. So, any further discussion on the contract extension? So, seeing none, we'll do a quick roll. So, Luno, yes. Myler.
Yes.
Ames.
Yes.
I don't think Rick's with us. Back at Khan.
Yes.
Morgan.
Yes.
Ardinger.
Yes.
Bergeron.
Yes.
Cascadden.
Yes.
Ryan.
Yes.
Beardmore.
Yep.
Estabrook.
Yes.
Tremblay.
Yes.
Dwyer.
Yes.
Eward.
Yes.
Zanchuk.
Yes.
Heath.
Yes.
Terrific. So that passes. All right. So Bruce, I'll have that signed after our meeting today, and get that sent over to you and sponsor services. So you and Diane.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, great. Next up is what we've all been waiting for: discussion of the final report. I'm going to turn it over to Bruce, but I'm also going to say that Mel and Jay and I obviously have had substantial input with and close working connection with Carrie and Jordan and Bruce on this. So I'm satisfied to really sort of, I know there's more changes that need to be made, but I would really like for this meeting to really hear from everybody on the commission and get your feedback, comments on this. So I'm just gonna, Mel, Jay, is that all right? Yep, good. Bruce, it's if you can take it away here.
Thanks, Dave. I'll just say that personally, I'm happy we're at this point. Obviously, we're not done, but we're getting close. And the main question that we want to have you respond to today is, does the report as a whole, and especially the substantive findings and recommendations, fairly reflect the work of the commission? Today, we're not asking you to express your individual vote one way or another, or opinions about the overall report. You'll have a chance to take a formal vote on the report a week from today. And of course, you'll also have a chance, as Dave has said, to register your individual comments, observations, any concerns, objections, any affirmations that you want to especially highlight in the report, any topics that you think should be addressed by future legislators, in the individual member statements that each member is welcome to submit. And a reminder that we'll really need those by close of business on Friday, this Friday, the 27th, to allow us to fold those into the final report so we can produce it for posting and discussion next Monday. Believe it or not, we're not going to go through a line by line 68-page conversation today. As Dave said, if there are specific edits or formatting suggestions that you have, please send those to me, and I'll share those with Dave, Jay, and Mel. They're the final arbiters on the final language in this report, not me. This is your report, the commission's report, not Carsey's. We're here to support you and be sure the process has been inclusive and fair and constructive, which I think it has. If it's a relatively minor editorial suggestion, a semicolon rather than a colon, I'll probably deal with that myself. But if anything hints at suggesting any kind of substantive meaning change, I'll certainly get their input before we do that. Thanks for your patience over the weekend as we work to get this to you. Thanks for your patience in accepting what's not a finished product today. There are obviously some formatting questions. You even saw in the document that you got a few continued sidebar comments about clarifications that need to be made as we go along, but hopefully they're not particularly substantive. So keeping that question in mind, does the report as a whole fairly reflect the work of the commission, the input that you received, deliberations that took place, at least in general terms, where the commission landed on the most important points? What we wanted to do is to use the final section of the report as the sort of conversation anchor for the next hour and a half or so. And that's the overall findings and recommendations in the report. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. Let's make sure I've got the right version on here. That's the 22nd. Hang on 1 second while I make sure that that's final report draft. That's the one there, I think. Yeah. Okay. Let me just bigger. Okay. So this is the beginning of the final section of the report. And I guess I'll pause for a second. And before we get into this substance, let's see if you have any other comments about what comes before this. Again, we're not line by line editing right now. You see that there's not an executive summary written yet. We wanted to wait on that to be sure that nothing that was discussed today might have any ultimate effect on that executive summary. We are under the assumption that that executive summary, though, is likely to become a piece that is that will stand alone and used by readers, by audiences, legislators, media, to get at the essence of our findings and recommendations. And so this final section, concluding findings and recommendations, will be, as you see it verbatim, a part of the executive summary after some framing language in the executive summary about really the key areas of emphasis and proposals. For example, shifting from an input-based cost formula to an output-based cost formula will be introduced and discussed in the introduction to that executive summary. Introducing this student-centered outcomes-based language and understanding how it is we derive the education cost model will be a bit of that executive summary as well as a little bit about the process of how the commission worked and the large public input, public comment process that we went through. So just wanted to let you know about that's the plan for the executive summary. Otherwise, the brief history of legislative and executive activity and judicial activity. Some of you have already offered some clarification comments. I appreciate that. We'll be sure to incorporate those. A description of how the commission went about its work is there. And again, any comments on that would be welcome. And then a summary of the findings from AIR, because of course that then provides, in a sense, the quantitative basis, the rational basis for the proposal that the commission is making is presented in the report, followed then by each of the work group reports that you all have been working on within the work groups, and then leading to this final findings and recommendations. So maybe I'll pause there and just see if there are any general comments about the overall structure of the report or the flow of it. Again, let's be sure that we devote most of our time to the substance of these findings this afternoon. Chris has raised her hand, and because we're sharing the screen, it's helpful if you can use the raise your hand function in participants. So we'll be sure to see you. So Chris.
You're not going to like this. This is a structural comment. I think the report works really well for the first several sections, the charge, the history, the partnership with AIR. I think the public engagement work group report works very well. But then I think we get into lots of cycles of repetition. And I think that takes away from the power. I think in the adequacy and the fiscal work group, we get into lots of repetition, and it takes away from the power of the findings that are coming after that. So there are some key parts in those sections that are not covered in the findings and recommendations and that are explanatory and that are really important. But there are other parts that just begin to repeat things that were in the history, in the background, and then word for word what we're about to see next in the findings. So I think that will detract from the power of the report. I know it will take work to bring that together, but it feels like the reader will give up if they're just hearing the same things that have been said before, and then they'll give up before they get to the findings and recommendations. But as you said, they'll likely, I'm glad they'll be in the executive summary, but knowing that many readers start with the executive summary, they'll have read the same thing 3 or 4 or 5 times. So that would be my overall structural comment. I think it's moving right along until we get to those 2 sections.
I think one of the things, Chris, you're saying is that when you've tried to cobble together 3 different work groups together, it's difficult to try to decipher throughout that, so there's some consistency and not redundancy.
Exactly.
You're talking about the redundancy of some of the comments that are there. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. No,
Well, and I noticed too that the findings and recommendations are repeated verbatim in two different places. They're in the body and then they're in this final section. And they're the exact same things, except in the final section, they've been given these cute E1, 2 things, you know, that are very helpful. They're not just cute, they're very helpful, but they're the same things that were earlier in the report. So I agree with Chris that they should be reserved for the end.
so these are perfectly helpful comments, and I'm quite aware of the redundancies, and the editing process will have that concern in mind, your concern in mind, and try to eliminate that without losing the essence of especially the work group reports. The reason that all the findings and recommendations that you see in the work group reports are then provided verbatim at the end of the total report is so that they are all together in one place. If they simply sat in the work group reports, it wouldn't be obvious. It'll be a little bit harder to extract exactly what those were. But in any case, the general principle of reducing redundancies as much as possible is welcome. Absolutely.
Bruce,
Bill.
this is Bill. One possible way of getting at it while recognizing the importance of what you just said with the work group reports is to maybe think about moving these findings and recommendations at the end, which are very well organized and listed. I know when I read through those findings and recommendations at the end, I was asking the question, are these exactly the same as the other ones? And it found out that they were. Citations, I was looking for to which page, and obviously you can't do it yet because everything's moving. You could consider moving this concluding findings and recommendations up top, after the executive summary with citations, and then a section that explains, these important work groups that conducted, and maybe have those later as items that could be still left as an integral part, an integrated report, but referred to by the reader when they need to, like, oh, I want to see how that finding and have a citation to the fiscal policy work group report, the engagement report, the adequacy report, and you cite to them. And that might help the reader, depending on how you do the executive summary, kind of boom, oh, boom, because they're pretty detailed, the findings and the recommendations, and have that way, there will still be duplication. I'm looking at Chris in that approach, but it would preserve, kind of in almost, it's not an appendix, but it preserves the reports of those groups that did work hard.
No,
that's an idea for the team.
No, I think it's a good idea. We don't necessarily need an extra section if the executive summary itself, including what we see on the screen now, which is the bulk of the executive summary, if that were cross-referenced with page numbers to subsequent parts of the report, that would be the most efficient way for people to be introduced to the overall findings and recommendations, and then decide to look at the backup or read through the report directly. Again, I understand that if one were to sit down and read this report from first to last page, I'm not talking about first to last dollar, I'm talking about first to last page. It could be wearisome after a while.
Yeah, I think Chris's point is, Dick, that I concur with what she said. Really, there's two different kinds of redundancy. And the kind that I noticed and think worthy of this kind of discussion is sort of the overlap, but not exactly, between fiscal and adequacy. And you find yourself, well, was this said before? Was it a little bit different? It sometimes was a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So that melding those two, so there's consistency, sort of in a different sense than just straight repetition. And then there's the repetition issue that Bill was talking about. Maybe you can structure the thing so that it's not repetition, but emphasis instead.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think going into this, the notion was we can always give a trim on a haircut after the fact, but it's hard to put the hair back on after if you've cut it out. So you see the full, you see more here than you need to see, and your encouragement to take a little more off the top, it's just right.
And Bruce, we all know how much you're handling here. I mean,
well, that's
hard work.
It's the work. It's the work. Other general comments at this level. This is definitely helpful, and appreciate the nudges.
Bruce, it's David. I was going to ask, when you went into the editing part, what it struck me was it was almost an approach to a dissertation where you're going to tell us what you're going to tell us, then you're going to tell us, and then you're going to tell us what you just told us, right? Which is pretty standard and falls into this pattern of redundancy, which I'm not opposed to. I didn't read it 100% like that, but I felt it was very familiar like that. Bill's thought of moving those findings and such up front provides a roadmap where then you provide that contextual information around those findings through the rest of the document. And I thought that would have a much better flow, because I asked the same question to myself when I read it. Should this list of concluding findings and recommendations be more at the front as the gateway, and then we're going to tell you all about the why we have these findings and recommendations, and then somehow concluding. I don't know if that's where you then code with EF1, EF2 at the end as an appendix. Just a question of curiosity.
Good. Okay. Thanks. And what I'm thinking is that Jordan and Carrie will help me do magic if we were to move this up and cross-reference it to then the document that follows. There could be live links on each of those cross-references. So if EF1 is found also on page 16, that's noted here, and all the reader has to do is click, if using the online version, click onto that, and they're immediately taken then to page 16, for example.
Bruce,
yes.
just one more. It's important then up front in your executive summary that you describe a little bit more about the creation, the commission divided itself into these three efforts, so that they are signaled to the structure of the split up, and then your coding will work better.
And also, I'll mention, we haven't said it, in earlier conversation today with Dave J. Mill, what we'd like to do is frame that executive summary around the design thinking process that really did implicitly and explicitly sometimes guide our work. And so that's where we have a definition of the problem, the information that we collected, the models that we tested, and then the recommendations that came out. And so I think that's consistent, Bill, with what you were just suggesting as well. So, any other, let's move on to this section, wherever this section lands. This is the heart of the matter here. But any other general comments about the rest of the report?
I had a comment on the fiscal policy section. I mean, are you going to move into that section separate from adequacy?
Ask that again, sorry.
Are you going to move into the fiscal section after adequacy, or are you looking at all of these findings together?
We're gonna go through all of these findings that are collected here, aggregated here.
Okay, so I can wait till you get there then.
Okay, all right. So at one point it was suggested that we be explicit about how our recommendations reflect the charge that the commission was working from in HB4 RSA 193E2, whichever it was, E, I think. So that those charges are listed here, and you'll see that I noted that that for item E, which called for a listing of any currently unfunded special education mandates, we simply didn't spend our time doing that. Partly, as I said, a matter of capacity, and a focus on other aspects of special education funding. So an acknowledgement that a reader looking for that, right now at least won't find that. If that's critical, perhaps during our extension period in the next few months, we can take an effort at that. But that may also be a bit of a rabbit hole to go down in terms of trying to identify what is a quote unfunded special education mandate unquote. There are other aspects in the report relative to special education categorical aid and special education awaiting and so on that at least address how it is that special ed services are funded. And then of course in item F, we made some effort actually, including with colleagues at DRA, to parse out this reference to Class A, B, and C properties. And we had invited Senator Guida to come because of his interest in this particular part of the charge. That wasn't able to happen. So we didn't develop specific recommendations around property classification. It's certainly a topic for future legislative attention. So with that, I think we will just move down through these, and if we could sort of stay in order, so let's not jump around too much. And also let's not get too stuck in a particular briar patch. Again, the language here should be pretty familiar, but it can always be better. And we want to make sure that it does reflect the work group reports and where we landed. So with that, comments, again, if you can raise your hand so we can see you, that would be great. So we start with engagement findings, and Chris has a hand up.
This is just a question. You know, there are a lot of like issues of agreement and, you know, all that sort of stuff. Do you have a way that you want those from us on this, or are you just going to do a copy edit for all this? I don't want to take any time now, but I also have this in PDF. So, you know, just as, because obviously this part wants to be well done. How do you want those?
Yeah, thank you. That we should have addressed that earlier. I think I'd like to, you know, keep this in PDF format for now. I'll of course maintain the master Word document for editing. So if you could just on a page, tell me that on page 23 or page 66, the line that begins with XYZ should read ABC.
Okay.
I know that's a little tedious as opposed to doing the track changes, but that would be, that would help me a lot if we did it that way. Because otherwise I'm going to have, as you know, 12 different colors on my track change document. Any other, as we slowly move down through engagement findings, again, engagement only provided findings. They did not make recommendations. That was their job, to find out what various constituencies thought about the topic.
Bruce, this is Bill. I just wanted to follow up on Chris's procedural comment. I assume we can use, if we have counts, we can use handwritten markups to the PDF, scan and send to you too.
Sure, oh sure, yeah.
Yep. And then in terms of the types of comments, how are they, you know, let's assume someone wants to delete a whole finding, which I don't have that position now. How does that get processed between now and Monday? And what kind of, will there be a black line or a red line version that will show what changes were made?
We can certainly do that in terms of the final document. We'll have a backup Word document that shows whatever changes are made from the current version. So with your example, Bill, you know, if one person suggested that a particular finding be eliminated entirely, I would check with Dave, but would recommend we not respond to that. We have to work from the consensus of the group. I'd be surprised if we're at that stage right now of, however, I recognize that there are individual disagreements about specific aspects of this. And that's where you should make those comments in your individual member statements that you believe that in this, for example, EF1 engagement finding 5, that we didn't hear that from the public and therefore it shouldn't go in there. Well, fine to say that in the individual comments.
Got it. Thank you. That helps me.
And again, this is the commission's report, not mine. So I will absolutely err on the side of consulting with Dave, Mel, and Jay if I have any doubt about changes to make. Certainly if they're substantive, I'll be checking with them. Well, then I think let's move on then to adequacy and distribution. I expect that this is where there will be some more feedback and discussion. And we have about an hour and to go through these two, which is fine. And Chris has a hand up.
Yeah, F1, ADF1. Again, I know this opens a can of worms. I don't remember, and of course I've missed some meetings, that we said that an opportunity for an adequate education conforms to the state's minimum standards. You know, those minimum standards are more like inputs, and in many ways, many of them really have very little to do with an adequate education. I don't disagree that, you know, they are what they are, but I'm wondering about, I wouldn't want anybody to think that those minimum standards have much to do with either accountability or an adequate education.
Any other thoughts about that? This is always about language, and conforms is a difficult verb, perhaps. Again, we're not going to get into wordsmithing today, but I get the point myself, Chris. Not sure. I guess I'll invite you, Chris, or anybody else, if you have an alternative way of getting at the relationship between statutory definition of an opportunity for an adequate education and state minimum standards.
When you're talking of minimum standards, Bruce, are you talking about minimum public school, minimum standards for public school approval? Or are you talking academic standards? You know, we use the word standards throughout in different contexts, different ways. So what are we talking here? Are these for minimum standards for public school approval? You're talking?
I use the word.
I was assuming they were, but you raise a good point.
We can make sure that, I mean, is it public school standards is the right language to be consistent with the statutory language.
It is.
Yeah.
I thought we took the word minimum out of it. I thought they were standards for school approval now.
They are standards.
They're not minimum standards anymore. I don't think they're called that.
They are not.
So that should come out. Minimum should come out.
Yep, that's fine.
Because there are no such things as the state's
Right,
minimum.
it's just the regular, you're right, Iris, it's standards, yeah,
Yeah, I remember when we took that out.
yeah.
Good, thank you. This is the kind of accuracy, clarification we need. So again, I'm not going to make any changes on screen here, but now this is noted and we'll definitely make that clarification.
Just take the word minimum out and it'd be accurate,
Right.
the state standards.
Right. And it is important to be in there because it is something that several districts struggle with. They don't want to meet those standards and they are there and we need to have those there. Those are, when they say minimum, to me, they are the minimum, but everybody should have what's contained in those standards, at least.
Those standards are still in our statutory law. I don't want, know why
Correct.
people are saying they're not. They're in 186:8, and it's
That's
reads
right.
specifically, minimum standards for public school approval for all grades of the public schools. It's clear.
Thought we took the word minimum out.
No.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
All right, well, then you got to go back and check on that.
You got academic standards, you got certification standards, you got all
Correct.
kinds of standards.
It is out of 193E2.
Right,
Oh, okay, then that's what I'm recalling.
Yeah.
right.
All right.
Thank
And there it only refers to standards.
you. Okay.
And we'll be sure that this language is, again, is accurate.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
I guess I just want to, for a second longer, Rick. And Rick, you know the trigger that there is to the word minimum, that the suggestion perhaps the state is setting standards that local communities have no say in. So just saying state standards doesn't doesn't qualify that in any manner. It just says states, you know, I mean, we have standards and requirements in various places.
Yes, we do. But when we're talking about minimum standards for public school approval, we're saying that those standards which are in the handbook, which all the school districts get, for example, you have to have 43 courses offered in a high school. You have to have this, that, and that, but you can go beyond. And most districts do go beyond. So yes, these are minimum standards, which are required. Certifications written in there too. It's a wide gamut of requirements the schools have to, and if they don't comply, they're not an approved school.
Okay.
All right, again, I think point taken here, and we'll be sure that this language does reflect current statutory language. This next one, the second finding by adequacy, it says a lot in here, and we cite the AIR findings relative to the relationship between property wealth and school spending, and student outcomes and property valuation. So this is an effort to try to provide a summary of what to the commission became an important finding relative to what we've referred to as the kind of regressive structure of the current formula. And then building, Chris, go ahead.
Well, I wonder on the next one of AF3, which you're on, whether it would help to have a footnote maybe about the special education, that it does not include catastrophic aid. People will look at the four, you know, at the large multiplier there, but still be concerned about that. I wouldn't have that concern about the other multipliers, but it might be making that note.
Great, very helpful.
Maybe we can specify, because there is no categorical aid. It's just special education aid. It's a grant.
Catastrophic.
But it, we could say exclusively local district responsibility or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll go in a footnote right on this page. Good. And so then that continues on. And you can imagine that, well, Jay and others had a good time trying to clarify what this base is that's arrived at in the regression process, because the problem, of course, is the word base, because that's used by the Department of Education to calculate the adequacy grants. And so this was our best effort to do that. And
it uses the AIR definition.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of presenting it here, but I think that, Jay, and maybe you've already done this, you go back to the adequacy report where this same question is dealt with, that you don't say it exactly the same way, in a way that I didn't think was right. Take a look.
Yeah, that's a good catch.
I think to that point, I think it's real important that whatever findings you present in this, you know, aggregation of findings and conclusions at the front that you may move up, that it be exactly the same language in the report, because you don't want to leave differentials between those.
Absolutely.
That relates to Dick's point, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, I was concerned with this one that it really is difficult to calculate, you know, per student cost the way it's described, because it's the sum of each of the categories that apply to a particular student times the base cost plus the base cost is the total. And I don't see where maybe it's buried in the in the AIR report, but it's nowhere in our report here, at least that I could find, that specifically gives you sort of the methodology for calculating the cost of a student's education. And we talk about each student. And you're just saying all weights times base equals per pupil cost. And it's the summation of each particular weight times the base cost, all in parentheses if you want to do it mathematically, plus the base cost that equals the pupil cost. So 5,000 plus 1.49 times 5,000 plus 4.29 times 5,000. The sum of all that is the cost. And I don't see how we've described it here actually gets to that.
Good
I'd
job.
like to follow up on that.
I'm
Can I
sorry?
follow up on that?
The
I think I mean, the way it's been expressed here is the most understandable way to present it. I get that. But the fact is that what this represents is a certain distribution that was readable in the simulator tool.
Right.
So it seems to me that if I was reading this section, I would say, okay, and what does that result in terms of a distribution? And I think there needs to be a way to link this statement to the distribution that resulted from it, so that people can see what that looks like.
Bruce?
Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, I think what Iris said can't be overstated, how important that is, because it is about the distribution of total education costs for every school district. That's what the ECM and the weights get you to. It's not to an average per pupil cost or even a specific per pupil cost. It's
Right.
the total cost of education for that school district.
So how can we have a report that doesn't take that next step and show you what it is?
Where would you show that, Iris?
I don't know. It's the first time I'm even thinking about it as a result of this conversation, but
Well, I mean, the ECM shows that.
Yeah.
Well, that,
I mean, it needs to be somewhere in the report.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a way to get to that information is what I'm saying.
how do you,
Not sure I care where it is.
okay, so a link would be satisfactory.
I think it deserves more than a link. I mean, I think it's a fairly significant piece of information. Here's the distribution that results.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we have actually in the language that we skipped over, the stuff way above, when it talks about cost of inadequate education, we've moved away from talking about the cost to educate a pupil to the cost of providing the cost of estimating, the formula for estimating the total cost of education for a school district, which is what the ECM does.
But I mean, I think there could be a linking statement, and then in the appendix could be the actual distribution that results. But I think it needs to be referenced at least here and maybe elsewhere. It's a really significant piece of what has come out of this.
Let me try. There are two ways of coming at this. One is the way that Val explained the formula. Another is that there are 168,000 students. Weighted, there are 470,000 students.
Yeah.
That 470,000 is assigned to all the school districts. So whatever the weight is in the school district times the base cost is what the ECM does.
Right, but I don't think people should have to calculate that. When we have it in a spreadsheet, we can show them.
Understood. I'm just trying, if that's what we're trying to show, we can cut that spreadsheet down to something that has only a few columns as opposed to something that's 40 columns.
I think that would be useful as long as one of the columns is the final distribution amount.
Can I ask Iris, in the simulation model, it goes through the weighting, and then it has a total amount that would be distributed to a district like Manchester. It doesn't do it on a per pupil basis, but it doesn't.
Right.
There's this total big amount. That's one row in the simulation, one column in the simulation model by town. And then there is another column that you can manipulate to get to a per pupil, and it's actually per unweighted pupil. Is a reference to the column enough in the simulation model, or are you suggesting preparing an alternative appendix to this report?
No, I mean, I have to go back and look at it. I mean, I don't remember where my spreadsheet is and which column my eye went to, but I have a feeling it was the per pupil and the difference between what Bedford and Manchester, or, you know, I wanted to do not so much a number for each place as a comparison, but the numbers are the way to do that comparison in terms of equity. So I think it's important to have the number for per pupil.
If I could, it's important, I think, that to stay with the basic premise that what the ECM model did is get to a total amount for each district. And that amount then goes to the district for local governance. It does compute in there, it does the division for another column. I think it's important that we refer to the simulation model rather than recreating another appendix, because, and we can do that in a very direct way to the AIR, simulation model located on the website, row this, row that, column this, column that, by any town that what someone wants to look at, and the comparison. Because I think that was the most direct, comprehensive statement by AIR of their work.
I think it deserves more attention than that.
Okay.
So I think you've just defined the challenge here clearly. And we've got a couple of ways to get at that. Mary Heath had her hand up earlier. Mary, if you wanted to make a comment.
I just want to agree with Iris. I think that people need examples. They need to see something, and it's not as clear as it should be. So just to concur with Iris.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. So I think that's the challenge in what we call F3. F4, the point here is to emphasize that it's a slippery slope if you start to tinker with the entire model, estimated education cost model in terms of the weightings. So it's really intended, I think, to be a cautionary statement because of the consequences on calculations and therefore the distribution that would happen if we were to start, if one were to start adjusting those weights outside of a total reformulation of the ECM. Continuing on then, references finding relative to the inadequacy of CTE funding, a reference to the challenge of capital projects that are backlogged, and now specifically the concerns about what the consequences are. Remember that these are findings. We'll get to our recommendations in a minute. We address each of these areas relative to recommendations. Insufficient funding for special education to local school districts, state funding that is. And then a finding that early childhood education is critical and does affect outcomes. And because we're interested in student outcomes, we recognize that early childhood education is a predictor, and especially for children from low-income families.
First, I wanted to make one comment on this, that on F4, that if I broke that up, and I don't think that's reflected in this, but
Oh, you're right. Yes, you're right. We need to go.
Or
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
rear to this, but the point of breaking is so that when you see F9, ADF9, it's going to be consistent with this. What was broken is at the point where it says the integrity of the formula, so that doesn't get buried beneath a very lengthy recommendation or finding, and is very specific of finding that the formula needs to hang together, doesn't disaggregate well without affecting all the other pieces.
Yep. And that's a good example of a work in progress. That change, that breaking these out, has already been made back in the adequacy work group section of this report. It hasn't, that change hadn't been reflected down here yet.
In F5, Bruce,
Yes.
we're talking career technical education. Are you say resources available? By resources, are you talking about buildings, physical plants? Are you talking about trained personnel? Are we talking about dollars that are allocated annually in the funding formula? What are we talking about as resources here?
I can't vouch for the language itself. My interpretation is that it's always about money, resources to whatever the resources are, personnel, capital, equipment. Those all require money, and there's been insufficient money. Is
So
how
it
I
all
interpret.
boils down to funding, costs. So you're talking to dollars, and that I can agree on. And because we have some excellent facilities out there, we've been to some on the advisory group, which are up there in the Lakes region. They have a wonderful facility. And so does Concord in many ways too. It's the funding, the tuition, the transportation, how that's done. That's all messed up.
So Rick, this is a great example of, if you could send me directly your preferred clarification on F5, that would be great. Really, you're the guy here. You know best how to say this.
Okay, clarified. Thank you.
Thank you. Now down to then recommendations, where we get a little bit meatier and still a few comments here. But so in any case, here now you can imagine that this is what the legislators are going to be looking at, most carefully. So we emphasize going to an outcomes-based formula and then phasing that in over 3 biennia, again, reflecting our discussion at our last meeting. So I'll just stop and see if folks have questions or comments on any of these in order, please.
Yeah, I just have one word.
Go ahead, Iris.
On ADR 7, we need to stick the word quality before early education programs. We used it earlier in the findings section.
Good.
But we didn't carry it over here.
Good catch.
And back on page 34, my notes say, I don't remember what's on page 34, but there must be a reference to it there.
Yeah.
And we need to stick it in there too, quality.
Yep, I agree with you, Iris. We had wanted that word quality to be there with early education. That's right.
Yeah, but the research is based on having the positive outcomes.
That's right.
To be a quality program.
So again, there's consistency between what's above and what's here. We have to, but thank you. Yes, that I remember making that change, and we'll make sure it's made here.
So Bruce and Iris and Barbara on that, and I don't remember the term, but can quality be defined as, and I forget the standards body that certifies?
Well, there's licensing, which is sort of a floor for quality.
Yeah.
It means
but
you have a safe environment, and there is more to licensing now about programming.
Correct. That is correct.
There's also certification too, like what
there's what's called accreditation. No, certification is of an individual. Accreditation is of a program.
Right.
And there's an association that accredits
one at a time
center-based programs, and there's another association that accredits family child care programs.
I think Dave might be talking about the QRIS.
There's that too.
because I don't think we'd want to assume that you have to be an NAYC accredited program.
Yeah, so
No,
I'm
but
not,
there are different standards of quality, which was his question. I would say for our purposes to begin with, in the state in which most of our children are experiencing this, licensing would be a floor to begin with, because we have a lot of children in illegal childcare programs that are not only not benefiting them, they're detrimental. So I would suggest that we begin with a floor of licensing, but I think that's something for further discussion in the future. I think quality tells people where we think the discussion should head.
Are you talking licensing through the HHS? Or are you talking?
Well, that's where
education
early
through
childhood
DOE?
programs are regulated unless they're school-based, yes.
Right.
All right. We'll stick with quality for the moment.
Good.
I do think that it's just putting on my childhood career hat here for a second. It is a bit of a rat's nest, bad metaphor, when we to parse out the different kinds of accreditation and program approval. And I think the commission did not receive testimony on those. But I do think that inserting the word quality is consistent with the testimony, that we received. So I think that's probably a way to land on that for now. But and again, that's something to attend to in the future.
Okay.
Good.
Good, Bruce.
So we just jumped to R7. Any comments on these other adequacy recommendations, 1 through 6?
Bruce, I do.
Bruce,
Yes, John.
Second, Corinne has a comment she wanted to make, but I don't think you saw her hand. Corinne?
No, thanks, David.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to add to the, maybe a reference to the New Hampshire Early Learning Standards, which covers probably licensing and, all the requirements for quality, high quality. I mean, if you were looking for something to reference, they're called the New Hampshire Early Learning Standards.
Thanks, Corinne. John Beardmore.
Just wanted to raise my concern with the first recommendation, which is the 3 biennia phase-in. To me, it kind of raises an overall concern with how we got to where we are right now. Did the adequacy group consider a 1 year or 1 biennia phase-in and a longer phase-in and land on 3? And as members who didn't participate in those subgroups, how do we note our displeasure or lack of support with a recommendation? Is the suggestion, which seems to have just come up this morning, that we all mail in like signing statements that are individual statements of what we would have done differently? Because as I look through this, there's several areas where I don't think we're strong enough. There's an area like this where I think we're too strong and specific. How are we supposed to reconcile disagreements with specific recommendations? And for the record, I don't agree with any phase-in, period. I think we've been kicking the can for 30 years in the idea that this group's gonna recommend a formula, which I think is really great, but then take 6+ years to phase it in makes no sense. So I know I just put a lot on the table, but.
No, it's okay. So John, I'm going to answer the process question, then ask Jay to respond to the substance question. On the process, we had in the last meeting or two discussed this. We invited commission members to submit what we call individual member statements that will be included in the final report in the appendix, the whole section in the appendix, for whoever would like to register specific concerns or objections or disagreements or affirmations of any part of the report, specifically the recommendations and findings. So that's what I was referencing at the beginning of today's meeting that we'd like to see by Friday at the end of the day, so we can include those in. So yeah, sorry, I think you might have not been present for part of that discussion at a previous meeting. So we wanted to manage it that way. That was something Dave J. Mill came up with. But Jay, if you, or Dave, I know you've been thinking about the phase in as well. If you guys would respond to the substance here.
I'd like to speak to this too, please.
Let's start with Jay and Dave. Jay's the author of the chair of the adequacy group.
Yeah. So this current biennium, we know that in the first year of the biennium, that local districts will have already set their rates for taxation for fiscal 22. We can also anticipate that for fiscal 23, there are structural aspects of any of our recommended changes that would need to go into place, and notification available to districts that that's the change in the process that would take place in a subsequent fiscal year. So I think in the least, this is a multiple biennia. You want to take out the 3, I'm fine with that. It's just that some people had said they were concerned that we hadn't, and I think Corinne, I think of, what did we mean by, what's the term? How long will this take? So John, I don't want to just leave your disagreement without a means for us to still be able to address it. I just think that it's not going to be accomplished in a single biennium ahead of us. And if we just want to say over, I don't know. But I think we can be flexible without saying that there's a defined timeline. But that's what we were trying to respond to, is a concern that there was no defined timeline.
Yeah, the previous text said multi-year, phased in over a multi-year period. And folks, when they saw that, said, no, it's got to be specific. And that's when we landed on the 3 biennia.
So if I can add to that, Jay, I think, laid that out pretty well. I think what's important here, though, is that it's more than one budget cycle. And, for the reasons Jay laid out, the first year of the budget cycle really has to be predictable back in December, January, when school boards and budget committees are setting their budget. Budget gets signed in, let's say, June. So they need to have a pretty good, school districts need to have a pretty good understanding of what's going to be the state, what's going to be the funding plan, 5-6 months before the budget's actually signed. And, obviously even prior to debate in the House and Senate and Committee of Compromise. So I guess the next question would be, all right, can you make the jump in 1 year, in the second year of the biennium, from one funding model to the next? And we just haven't seen examples where that was done. We saw Massachusetts specifically; they're doing it over a period of 7 years, and we've had discussions about a phase in so that it doesn't. And I think the term was shock the system, all in 1 year. But I agree with Jay that I don't think we need to be specific on 3 biennium, but if it's going to be on multiple biennia, I think it's important to lay that out there, because that obviously comes with cautions in place, because you can't bind a future legislature to the current legislature's plans. So there's a risk to that.
Well, we could enact a couple of pieces, right? In that second year, lift the cap on the 363 and set up a mechanism for the DRA to collect excess. Those are a couple of foundational kinds of pieces. Once you know that those are in place, then you can begin to do the rest of it. And anyway, that's the kind of phasing that I think local districts need to be aware of in advance of whatever change we do.
Can I speak to this?
Iris.
Thanks. In terms of whether first of all, I agree with John in his objection to the phase-in. I think that 3 biennium is just asking for trouble. This idea of avoiding a shock to the system is where this collar came in the last time. And once you start putting limits on the growth of your own distribution formula, it goes nowhere but downhill. So I think there could easily be language that is much more positive in terms of the timing, that calls for implementation to take place as soon as possible, and frame that in some way. In terms of whether this report is accurate to the workings of the commission, though, I mean, the only adequacy work group meeting I think I missed was last Thursday, and I don't remember us discussing a phase-in. I thought the idea of a phase-in was coming out of the fiscal policy work. And so I am a little surprised now that John has pointed out to see this under our recommendations.
Could I speak to this?
Dick?
Yeah, I agree with what, well, with the recommendation that Iris just put up, which is to simply say outcome levels should be adopted and implemented at the earliest possible date. Why do we have to lay out how long it's going to take or kind of figure that out? It's sort of like, it reminds me, I'm sure it's totally different, but the Supreme Court, when it issued its Brown decision, it called for its implementation with all deliberate speed. It means that we're going to go at it. We think the legislature should go at it and do the job as soon as possible.
I would agree with that approach. Dave,
I would support that too.
I agree with Dick's language, absolutely, because the original term was multi-year phase-in.
Right.
And all I thought was, great, now they can just, as you say, John, kick the can down the road, nothing will get done. They can just put it off. But the language that Dick just put says it needs, it raises the, it needs to happen. Some action needs to take place. And so I like that wording as well.
Yeah, I can go with that.
John, did you have another comment? John Beardmore, did you finish your comment?
No, I would endorse Dick's language as well, and understanding that the legislature does have some timing inconsistencies with the local budgeting process. That'll be dealt with. And the legislature's going to do what the legislature's going to do to get a new formula passed and implemented in a time frame that the state can afford. I don't think we need to be prescriptive in terms of giving the legislature 6 years to go from plan to implementation.
Let me ask if anybody who hasn't spoken up yet on the commission would like to weigh in on this. It feels like there's some agreement around this last points, but any other comments? Then let's continue to move on. I think that Dave, J, Mel certainly heard the direction you all like to go in.
Thank you.
Anything else on adequacy and on adequacy?
Yes, I have a question on R3.
Yep.
We're talking about ensuring that the resources required are there for students which have these needs, educational needs, to achieve a statewide average outcome. In special education, our goal is not the statewide education outcome. It is their IEP goals that we're striving to get kids toward. Some of those students will never achieve the statewide average in achievement. So I'm a little bit conflicted there with the differentiated aid part when we're talking about the special education component where we're giving a weighted value there. Yes, I understand the need for the weighted value, but I don't have the expectation that all those students are going to arrive at the point we desire.
I think my quick answer to that, Rick, I don't know whether this is sufficient, but we're talking about the opportunity to achieve. And every child we shouldn't prejudge any child's abilities. And so the idea is that every child has that opportunity. And yes, some children are not going to get there, no matter what inputs are provided, but we don't have to say that.
Well, we do when we have a meeting with parents and we go through the IEP meeting and the parent signs off on it and they all recognize this is the outcome we're looking for Johnny.
Yeah, and now you've done the job. You've figured it out. They've had the opportunity to achieve.
And I agree with Dick, absolutely. I think you're targeting exactly. And in the spirit of inclusion, we want all children to achieve the same high standards. And we don't want to deviate from that. The IEP is the vehicle by which parents have an opportunity to change that pathway.
I agree, Mary. And the key word there, again, the Dick, is the word opportunity.
Yeah.
That they have the opportunity to achieve the best they can. So that's the key.
So could it be stated a different way that the education cost model, the costs through the educated cost model? No, I'm not saying it right. That the predicted costs for a school district should be sufficient, or should be aligned with the resources needed, so that every student has the opportunity to achieve statewide average outcomes. Because again, the predicted cost is a total cost.
That's better than the predicted cost for the district is much different than the individual pupil.
Right, right, exactly. And each individual pupil is going to have different needs, or certainly can have different needs. But that the total estimated cost is for the district to provide the aligned with the resources required by students, for all students to have the opportunity for achieve statewide average outcomes.
Yeah, I'll just point out, Dave, in response to that, without getting into the substance, try not to. If we simply say predicted costs for all students, we've moved away.
Predicted costs for a district.
Students with greater needs is defined by differentiated aid. So. Then that sounds like we need to just mull on that question that Rick has raised and Dick's and others' responses to that at this point. Any other comments on these? Let's continue so we'd be sure and have time for fiscal policy.
I just ask a question about it's R5, ADR5,
Yeah.
about the building aid funding. If we remember, in 2008, the funding was put on a moratorium because of the fact that there was no specific way to identify the schools, or they didn't have an order. So we ended up with the having to actually borrow money to be able to pay during that biennium. So I just don't, I'm concerned about putting in the previous 20-year distribution cycle, because that would get us right back into the problem that we had in 2008 when we had to bond the $40 million to pay for that. So just a concern there, please.
That's a good statement. Back then it was $540 million that we owed.
That's right.
Right, but it was also a much higher annual appropriation.
But that led us to that debt.
Yeah.
Exactly. We just need to have a system. What we need to have in place is like what they have in CTE. Their districts are on a cycle or if there's an approval cycle, so that you can only do so many projects per year to stay within the limited funding. Because otherwise, like, that statement would bring us back to the problem that we had in 2008.
I think, David, I think we could probably take out that restored to previous and find a way to say this that gets the 20-year distribution cycle by project.
Okay, rather than exactly the same. Yeah, that's fine.
And I would hope in a way that calls for greater spending. I mean, the problem about bonding resulted from an unwillingness to budget for the cost of any building aid. I mean, the moratorium was put in place to save money. You could have continued to fund building aid while you studied it. There was no reason not to fund it.
But Iris, that was 2008 when we had the ARA money and our state was in deficit. And
I know.
we had to figure out a way to pay, to have the budget. Okay, I just wanted to remind you of that awful time.
It was still there. I don't think that the state, I mean, there is a stronger statement elsewhere in the report about building aid, but I think that if all we're calling for is the return to that distribution cycle and a vague call for greater funds. I mean, the projects are backlogged to such an extent that students are at risk. So I think we need to be more aggressive in calling for even maybe some kind of plan to bring all schools up to air quality standards.
I'd be happy with something like that.
I'll be a little bit, as a process person here, a little bit cautious about going beyond the testimony and deliberations that have taken place so far. We don't want this to be the moment when we begin to add recommendations or statements that haven't been deliberated by the full body. So we're trying to
Okay, then I just got it on the record. Thanks.
Okay.
But Bruce, I think the point, we do have a recommendation in the back, in the, pages 30, whatever.
In the briefs, yeah.
No, even in the text of
In the body.
Yeah. I think we can get some of the specificity into this recommendation or another R here.
Good. Thank you, Jay. Okay, thank you. Fiscal policy findings. We'll just focus on these findings initially. There were a number of them. Obviously, fiscal policy was really the bulk of the consequences of what this commission's been doing. So if we can go in order on these, any comments on any of these?
So some of these, Bruce, just because we raised them in the fiscal policy work group report, maybe they belong somewhere else. New Hampshire average student performance is among the best in the nation. I don't know.
Yeah, and actually that is the kind of statement that is made in other parts of the report.
Yeah.
So this is a candidate for redundancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, Dave, if you and Jordan want to take a shot at paring these down.
Yeah, we're going to do that, and same, now that we can read the paragraph, the sections that precede fiscal policy sections where we see stuff's already been covered.
Yeah.
We'll trim it. So.
And that's that melding of adequacy and fiscal policy we talked about. Yeah, I agree. Now that we look at these with fresh eyes, we can see that jump out.
Yeah.
Let's see. We have Iris and Chris. So start with Iris and then Chris. Or maybe Iris. That was an old hand that was raised.
What? Oh yeah, it was an old hand. Sorry.
Old hand. Okay. And Chris on this one.
I have comments about both ones that are called FPF6.
We got two of those.
Yeah, I think that the first one just needs some clarification. The discussion of more needy communities is the wording needs to change. You know, there are needy communities from the point of view of low property values, but then there are also communities that are needy by the type of students. So that might be clarified a little bit. And then in the next one, I think what's meant is an empirical approach rather than evidence-based. I think that's going to be an important one, and I think that's what's intended there.
Thanks. Bill.
Yeah, I agree with Chris that the reference to more needy, I'm okay with. I like it, but somewhere it should make clear that it's more needy in terms of both.
Right.
Right.
You know, and actually it's all of the issues of property wealth, income wealth, and even performance.
Right.
It is a general term that people understand, which I like using. But if somewhere in the report, maybe the first time we reference it, we say that more needy means by different measures, I think that's a good comment. Thanks, Chris.
And continuing down. Again, these are findings. We'll get to recommendations that back up these findings. Let me check here.
I had one, Bruce.
Go ahead, Bill, and then Chris.
When you say in FPF 11, and I wasn't sure, I had provided some edits on the earlier report. The state property tax is a state tax on individual property tax no, it's not on individuals, it's on property taxpayers. It's not on local property taxpayers. It may be administered through the local collection mechanism, but it is a state tax on property taxpayers. And that's, so I was a little bit uncertain about what that meant, and I missed it in my first go through. And when I was looking at it before this meeting, that I think it probably should say the SBT is a state tax on property taxpayers, if that's what we want to say.
I think that's, I think this was more taken from a comment at the last meeting, but I think what you said is getting to that.
Good clarification.
That makes sense.
More accurate. So we go to recommendations. And again, let's sort of take these in order. Comments, Chris?
I had one on the F10, and I'll do my I'll make an amendment or statement about this. I can accept that for residential, but I could never accept that statement for commercial, and we've had testimony to that effect given how the problems with commercial assessments at this point in time. So, we don't have to debate that, but that's something I will write about in my added statement.
Great.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Other recommendations for fiscal?
John's got his hand up.
Can we go to R1? Should and could we also include here taxpayer equity?
Dave?
Yeah, no, I've been back and forth on that. And I think a bunch of us have been back and forth on that. On student equity and taxpayer equity, I could support that. If it ends up being driven by taxpayer equity, you don't necessarily get student equity, but student equity, and when you have student equity, you don't automatically get taxpayer equity either. But generally, I think you'd see an improvement in taxpayer equity because in order to get to student equity, you do have to provide assistance that goes beyond the local community's ability to generate resources. So I think that's why we sort of came down on student equity as being the prime driver on it. But I absolutely agree with what you're saying on this.
Yeah, Bill?
To John's point, John, I would, it just me, I prefer leaving it the way it is. And here's why. I know that you could address taxpayer equity is a very important issue, but it's fundamentally a part of, I believe, tax policy. And I think that some of the recommendations that are in here about trying to introduce relief provisions for taxpayers who have particular circumstances like low cash flow or low net worth, those are directly targeted to get at taxpayer equity issues. In my view, in the past, where the legislature has muddled the concepts of student equity, which is, I'm going to make fun of myself again, where we're trying to get a progressive distribution of total public education resources, when the legislature has muddled student equity with taxpayer equity, we have not found that anchor that lets policy get to a true answer. And I believe my own view is that the commission's work with AIR has identified for the first time with crystal clarity that the real problem in New Hampshire is it has a regressive distribution of spending resources, including state aid. And that should be, as it says here, the priority should be on fixing that. If you fix student equity, you will have a natural effect. In Claremont, if you took more money from the state budget and you distributed it to Claremont, that would automatically have an impact on the burdens on taxpayers in that community. And so I think getting student equity down first helps the legislature get to a policy answer that bends the curve towards what Massachusetts' result is. That's my response, John, to your comment. I understand it, but that would be my preference.
How about if we added something with let's see, on student equity with relief programs directed to taxpayer equity.
No problem with that. In addition, up above in some of the comments, there was stuff that said place a priority on student equity, which will have positive impacts on taxpayer equity, which will often have positive or something like that. There's language like that up above.
I think we've got that.
Here. Either one, Dave, is fine with me.
All right,
but
can we move to
priority is important.
It's just a comment. I mean, the very title of a report is Achieving Greater Equity for New Hampshire Students and Taxpayers. So we put it right up front in the title of our report. So I think we need to somehow balance that unless we want to change the title of the report.
Yeah, I think we're getting it. I think we're getting it here. And look at R2, what I've just highlighted on R2. So we do use those phrases together. And what I just heard from that exchange with Dave and Bill is the priorities on student equity that will then have positive consequences for taxpayer equity.
Right.
That seems to capture the.
But if you come at it from the only thing I'm focused on with blinders is taxpayer equity as measured by some measure, that what happens is if we completely changed the tax system yet still distributed the money in the current way, you wouldn't have any impact at all on student equity. you've got to make it a focus to alter the distribution of aid.
So I think the distinction here in R1 is that we use the word priority, and in
Right.
R2, we talk about improving both student and taxpayer.
I mean, the distinction here is R2 specifically refers to the use of state funds to accomplish that, to achieve that. Continuing on.
John, you're muted.
What does R4 mean?
What were we getting at there? I think we were getting at, and I think it's talked about above, is data that's collected during the property assessment process that could help the legislature when evaluating mechanisms such as a state property tax or other revenue sources. I think that's what we're getting at there.
So are we trying to get DRA to build the link between property tax liability and ability to pay?
Well, not really, because I'm not sure. Well, I don't think that link's ever going to be able to be built from what I've seen, but you know, as you know, there's a lot of data fields in the Mosaic system that are not that are there. So there was an interest on the part of the department, you know, when they specified the tool to be built, had interest in data, but it's just not being collected by the local assessment process. So it could be that some of that data might be more useful or could be useful in evaluating a tax against the what is it, 5 criteria that you know, that we had talked about earlier. Is there different wording or something or clarification that?
I guess I'm just struggling to envision what NHDRA would do to fulfill this responsibility perfectly. You know, what would the department come up with that would unequivocally check this box?
Well, I mean, first of all, you know, this report isn't law, and so you know, so I think when looking at that, it would certainly have to involve, I think, a conversation with the department and with assessing standards and others to find out what could be collected and what could be useful in you know, in meeting in improving the state's ability to evaluate equitable funding mechanisms. And but you know, one of the things I think the commission has laid out all along is that we need to take a very careful look at what opportunities there may be for improved data collection. You know, not just here, but with the Department of Ed, the ability to you know, develop you know, a system to accurately reflect student outcomes, or improve the accuracy of student outcomes, or improve the way we look at student outcomes. And you know, we work with the data that we've got, and we're limited to that. So I think it's strong data, but could it be better? Probably.
Okay, we'll continue to keep an eye on this one to be sure we're saying what we intend to say. Any other, Chris, please.
It's R6. I think it's really important to modify homeowners and renters with low and moderate income. I know we have that in the body of the report, and it's the moderate income that I think is different and that we've heard testimony about.
I think that makes sense to make sure that that distinction comes through in that recommendation.
Yeah.
I agree, Chris, with that, and I saw that earlier too. The one thing I would ask Chris, if you low and moderate income, and we had discussed several times in the deliberations, low and moderate income and net worth.
And that gets to the
that
deferral.
okay to- yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
And R7 is probably dealt with earlier in the conversation we had at the top about multi-year phase-in. And we've already put the priority on student equity, which in turn improves taxpayer equity. So R7, now I'm making a substantive comment, sorry, as your facilitator, but
Yeah, but I think we've got to, Jay and Mel and I have to knock around the phase-in language a little bit, because I think we did have language that was really directed to improving student equity at the onset of a phase-in, so that you might accelerate, funds going to districts that, based on their, needing to move their outcomes and based on the fiscal capacity of the towns that make up those districts. So, we weren't necessarily considering a linear phase-in, but something that did provide some sort of relief in terms of student equity, improved student equity.
okay, so one more round on that.
As you and Mel and Jay consider that, I think back to Dick's point, the commission report probably doesn't have the same burden that elected legislators may have when they try and put together a whole package. From the commission's perspective, to implement these recommendations as quickly as possible, like Dick discussed before, I think that's a better commission result, recognizing that all of you legislators are going to have to suffer with actually putting together a package that is functionally,
that works. Yeah,
passes.
Yep. No, that makes sense.
Corinne?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to R2, and then I realized now after we had gone through these that they all say should. I was kind of hung up on the last sentence in R2 that says the state should increase the amount of state funds for education to improve student and taxpayer equity, and don't understand why we're not saying the state must increase state funding. I don't know that a new funding formula will be successful unless there is additional state funding. When you talk about the categorical aids, in addition to all the management of accountability and whatnot. So just my comment on the word should be must. And then
Corinne, I
for
think.
R1, I just thought of the student equity plus property tax relief could be added. Somebody was scrambling to look at how to word that versus taxpayer. That's it.
Okay.
I think on R2, we need to be very careful. And I like the word should, but it's to mandate something like that when we know we're in COVID and our revenues for quarters to come are not going to be great. I don't know where this money's going to come from.
Yeah. So I don't want to get hung up on this. These are recommendations. They're not law. And so by definition, there should. Law, the word should doesn't belong in law. The word shall belongs in law.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say, Dave. Don't take should out.
No, I'm agreeing with you, Rick. These are recommendations. This isn't law. Right?
I hope so.
Yeah.
It would be much easier if it could just be translated into law, although it'd be probably pretty messy law. So I think that, this has actually been extremely useful. And I know the report will be better because of this discussion we've just had. around all of it. There are additional sections at the bottom here on accountability and data. Chris has also offered a way of describing that important topic as well. Again, as part, any other input that you want to direct to me over the next few days, couple of days really, about any of the report in terms of its language, beyond what we've talked about today, focused on findings and recommendations, I welcome. And I'll do my best working with your commission leadership to land at a place that you'll feel comfortable with by and large on Monday. Iris. Iris?
That might have been an old hand.
No, never mind, I won't say that. Iris is not an old hand. So Dave, you want to move to public comment or?
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry, I
the timing,
didn't
Bruce.
realize I was on mute. I
Okay.
was asking if the idea is to have the final draft for next Monday's discussion, but our comments are due Friday. Can we see the final draft before we have to make our comments?
Yeah, that's, Bruce, don't we need on this current draft, if there are changes or concerns to be raised, they need to be done by Wednesday? Isn't that what we'd asked, based on this reading that we've got on this draft?
Okay, two things, yes. If
That on Wednesday, hopefully.
there's further input about this draft, this wording, yes, by Wednesday. The individual member statements registering your own views about the whole report, we need by the end of the day Friday.
Right, but we won't have seen the final draft.
In order then to move from the current version that we talked about today to a draft that can be distributed, and to give me time to have Thanksgiving on Thursday and then turn back to this on Friday. I'd like to have all of your input on Friday to work with Dave, Jay, and Mel to produce that final draft. Now, Iris, your point is taken in terms of the sequence here. And I don't, we'll do the best we can to get the final draft to you as soon as we can. Having it to you by the end of the day Friday may be difficult. Do we want to push out those member statements to Sunday?
So Bruce,
That's what I need to have happen. I'm having Thanksgiving on Friday and I'm not going to have time to, I'm not going to write a statement against a report I haven't read. So not against, but I mean in relation to.
Okay.
So I would really appreciate it if the member statements could be given to you by Sunday at the latest.
Dave?
If Bruce feels that the team needs those 2 days to finish the appendices, I'd say let's stick with the Friday plan on that. If you start right, I think what we've seen and discussed today is going to be very, very close, looking at the discussions to what's going to be the final. So I would say we know the tone and I think the substance of this report. We may be quibbling on some language items and stuff like that. I would say go ahead and prepare your member statements based on what you've got before you right now. And if on Friday something's been rectified to a point where it's like, wow, now I don't need to say that anymore. I don't need to say my concern about it. Then just cut it out of your statement, or you can leave it in there, and it's supportive of the changes that were made in the final. So I don't think there's anything holding anybody back from getting started right now.
But if there aren't any edits to be made to the member statements, then why can't they just be attached on Sunday? I don't understand. I think
it's a process timing thing, Iris.
Well, I think it's a process thing in terms of letting people know what they're reacting to.
I'll just comment on just the formatting. So if they are received on Sunday and we're adding appendices and we're putting them into the document, there's an expectation from commission members that have been expressed previously to have it at a certain time on Sunday. We're going to need them a little bit ahead of time, or else on Sunday you won't be getting the full document with everyone's member statements until kind of a little bit ways into the day.
Or Monday morning, yeah. No, I get, I totally get it.
So how about we do, how about we do this? Member statements Friday afternoon. If there's some tweaking to them that happens later, we'll try to find a way to accommodate that. We're trying to be all things to all people here, and which is what public education is all about. But I think we've got to respect the time that Carrie, Jordan, and Bruce need to prepare a document for our next meeting. Is that level of flexibility maybe possible?
Can I ask a question on that, Dave? I think it should be fine from my perspective, but we don't expect editing of member statements. When the members submit their statement, they're ultimately going to be compiled. So what you're talking about is a compilation problem. I'll tell you, I've worked on an awful lot of study committee reports. And I have a feeling that no one is going to punish the legislative leadership of this committee if Bruce and team need a little bit of compiling support after the report is approved on Friday to get all the member statements in. If you don't get this in on December 1st, I have a feeling you'll get it in on December 2nd. So there should be some room. I think members should feel fine about preparing their reports based on what they see, because it's not going to have to be to a particular page or to a footnote. I think you kind of see the substance of the report. And so a member statement can say, I want to emphasize this point. I still have concerns about the output methodology or something like that. I think the stuff you've got, but Iris's point is well taken in terms of the holiday. Every one of us has got the holiday concern, and to the extent that we might be able to buy a little time from December 1st to December 2nd for the Carsey school team to finish the final compilation.
No, we're not gonna buy any time. It's December 1st by 4 o'clock.
You can't use December 2nd anyway. That's organization day. We're
Right,
in session.
Right.
I hear you.
It's December 1st, 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
On the
Trying
governor's.
to save Friday. Maybe Iris gets a dispensation.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. If we're not overburdening the team, then we'll have a little flexibility. But if everybody can really do their best to get them in by Friday, that's where maybe we can have a little bit more flexibility, but we don't have flexibility on December 1st.
Bruce, is there a format that we should use for this, for our statement?
Yes, please get out your Funkin' Wagnalls and follow that closely, okay?
Good, thank you.
Okay, so we're a little bit after 4, but I think we can take a few minutes, do some public comment if we've got some today. There's been a lot of obviously a lot of discussion, and Jordan, I think we do have some. I know a lot of attendees have stayed with us, so thank you very much. And we've got a hand up over there. So Jordan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, so folks can feel free to raise their hand if they'd like to provide comment. I see Jeff has his hand up. So Jeff, I'll bring you in now.
Welcome, Jeff.
Good afternoon, Chairman Luno and members of the commission. Thank you for providing me one final opportunity to address the group.
You'll still have another.
Well, that's awfully tempting. Earlier today, the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project sent a memo to the commission regarding the draft report that all of you have discussed at length today. I hope that each of you have had an opportunity to read it or will have an opportunity to read it in its entirety, but I thought I might just briefly review the principal points for you now, and you've certainly discussed some of them, so I don't want to belabor them. In general, the Commission's report reflects some considerable progress toward devising a more equitable and sustainable system for funding New Hampshire's public schools. But from our perspective, there are 5 changes that could strengthen the report further before you act upon it a week from today. And the first is one that you've talked about to some degree already, and that is that the Commission's final report should seek to achieve equity for both students and taxpayers. We certainly agree that one of the chief aims of any reform of school funding should be a greater equalization of educational opportunity for all students, but such reform should also put an end to the tremendous disparities in property tax rates homeowners and businesses now pay to support their local schools. The 2 forms of equity are not mutually exclusive, nor does achieving one ensure that the other is attained. In guiding the legislature to create a more fair school funding system, the Commission should assign priority to both student and taxpayer equity. And I just want to point out that in addition to the comment that the Commission itself has received during its various meetings and engagement activities, it's also worth noting that much of the testimony that led to the initial creation of the Commission focused on the hardships that many now face in paying their property taxes. The second point is that the Commission's final report should specify the revenue source or sources the state of New Hampshire should use to meet its obligation to provide an adequate education to every child. And just briefly, the report does outline 3 models of how the cost of an adequate education might be met, but really only one of them, a single statewide property tax at a rate sufficient to provide full state funding, would likely ameliorate existing inequities while also complying with constitutional mandates. We would ask that the Commission endorse that model in combination with a robust state-funded property tax relief program for low and moderate income taxpayers. The third point, and this gets to a topic that was discussed a little bit during today's deliberations, is that the final report should recommend a funding formula that includes specific dollar values and should clarify the goals that the formula seeks to achieve. There's some discussion about the incorporation of AAR's work and the dollar figures reflected there. We would really urge the Commission to recommend a formula that incorporates not only that base cost per student, but the various dollar figures resulting from AAR's factor weights. I think, while the simulator that AAR has produced is quite valuable and could be incorporated as an appendix, I do think a few members of the Commission have pointed out that the more simple an explanation that could be offered and a more direct statement about what those dollar figures might be would be really valuable to future readers of the report. The fourth point is that the Commission's report should properly reflect the substance of school funding litigation in New Hampshire. In particular, the Commission's report portrays one of the central elements of the Supreme Court's ruling in the 2006 Londonderry case, namely that the state of New Hampshire must pay for the full cost of providing a constitutionally adequate education, and it points to that as advisory language. Later, the report goes on to assert that state funding should be applied to assist locally raised funds to ensure student equity. As we detail on our memo, neither of those statements is accurate, and both should be corrected in the Commission's final report. And finally, and this gets to, again, a topic that was discussed, so I don't want to belabor it, but the final report should avoid a protracted implementation timeline and should also, and this is a more technical point, consider a more frequent reevaluation of the education cost model. I want to thank all of the members of the Commission for the opportunity to share these views with you today. And as I conclude, I want to wish each and every one of you, as well as the staff of the Commission, a very happy, healthy, and safe Thanksgiving. And obviously you've got a lot of work to accomplish over the next 7 days, but I do hope that each of you will get some time to enjoy the holiday with the members of the family that are within your immediate vicinity. So take care. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff. And thanks for all your hard work. And I hope you as well have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Okay, how are we looking, Jordan?
Not seeing any other hands up at the moment.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks for everybody for their time today. 2 more hours to go. Week from today, 2 o'clock. Oh, we've got a hand up, Jordan.
Bringing in Jane.
Hello again, everybody. Jane Farini, City of Portsmouth. Thank you so much for all your work on this. You guys have done an incredible job. I am just briefly echoing my comments of last time. Please explore in your report recommendations for other sources to fund education other than the property tax. I've requested that you strike that SWEP be paid through the state, and urge you not to set up a system and recommend one that would return to a donor town system. One of the things that you folks did touch on very briefly, but some commentary on the state's obligation to fund education relates to the downshifting of costs on all municipalities and towns. In the last 10 years have been particularly challenging. I think for purposes of the loss of shared revenue, Portsmouth alone has lost $7.2 million as a result of the loss of revenue sharing over the last 10 years. And again, the retirement contributions, you've had prior speakers talk about that. That's obviously part of what funds, what's attributed per student for the cost for providing teachers retirement, which is wonderful. Unfortunately, the state, however, has not kept its percentage of contribution. And I know for Portsmouth alone, that figure has been a $20 million loss over 12 years, just on that retirement issue alone. And also the meals and room catch-up formula, that's another problem that the state is struggling with funding, not just education, but statutory obligation to redistribute meals and rooms to all cities and towns. And I think that the last decade, it's been 3.5 million from the city of Portsmouth because of that lack of the catch-up formula. So I know that you all have worked terribly hard. I urge you to consider my comments and other comments that you've received that support these comments through written public comment. But again, I do express a great admiration and great thanks for the works that you've done to date. So goodbye and happy Thanksgiving.
Great. Happy Thanksgiving, Jane. Thanks so much. Okay, so I think we've reached the conclusion for today's session, and I hope everybody has a wonderful and safe and happy and healthy Thanksgiving, and get out and spend, I know it might be a little drizzly on Thanksgiving, but get outdoors and go for a nice long walk. That's a good way to see friends and neighbors too. So I hope everybody happy and safe and healthy, and comments to Bruce, and we'll see you a week from today.
Thanks to all.
Great, thanks.
Great discussion today.
Take care, everyone.